All right, it's 4 o'clock. We're all assembled. I'd like to call the Monday, April 12th, 2021 Salina City Commission meeting to order and confirm with staff that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we'll have roll call, please.
Mayor Hodges?
Here.
Commissioner Davis?
Here.
Commissioner Franz? Commissioner Hoppick?
Here.
Commissioner Ryan?
Here.
Thank you. Before we have our Pledge of Allegiance and moment of silence, you may notice that there's 4 of us up here instead of the usual 5. And I wanted to let everyone who hasn't heard know that Commissioner Rod France sustained injuries in a fall last week, and he is in stable condition at Wesley Medical Center in Wichita. So as we proceed with our moment of silence, I'd ask that you keep him and his family in your thoughts, and please respect the privacy of the family at this time because they're going through a whole lot as they work through this. So we'll miss Commissioner France, not just his presence, but just having him here today as well, and we hope to see him soon. So with that, would you join me, rise if you're able, and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Right. We'll move on to awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, the month of April 2021 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the City of Celina. Sheila Beeson, Sexual Assault Advocate with DVAC, will read the proclamation.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. It truly is an honor. Whereas sexual violence is a widespread, preventable public health problem in Kansas, and whereas sexual violence is any sexual act that is perpetrated against someone's will, which includes sexual assault, rape, unwanted touching, threatened sexual violence, exhibitionism, and verbal sexual harassment, and all types of sexual violence involving victims who do not consent, or who are unable to consent, or who refuse to allow the act. And whereas 1 in 3 women and nearly 1 in 6 men experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetimes. And whereas 1 incident of rape is reported to Kansas law enforcement every 7 hours, 20 minutes, and 55 seconds. And over 5,300 people receive services for sexual assault from Kansas victims advocacy organizations each year. And whereas these statistics do not represent the true prevalence of sexual violence due to underreporting, and sex offenders often targeting people they perceive as vulnerable, less powerful, or less credible. And whereas the offender is known to the victim in the vast majority of cases, 80% in Kansas, and whereas the effects of sexual violence may be felt directly after or for many months or years later, and confusion, anger, sadness, shame, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness, and self-blame are all common reactions to sexual violence. And whereas the Domestic Violence Association of Central Kansas, also known as DVAC, provides 24/7, 365 days a year, free and confidential services to victims of sexual violence in the city of Salina. And whereas DVAC is available at 24/7, again, at 785-827-5862, or toll free at 1-800-874-1499. Now, therefore, I, Melissa Rose Hodges, Mayor, Salina, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2021 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in Salina, Kansas, and urge citizens to participate in this observance.
Thank you very much. Do you have any activities, virtual or physical,
We sure
that you've got
do.
going on this month?
Yes, for sure. So at the Salina Public Library on the 16th this week, We're at 12 p.m. We're having a lunch and learn titled "What is Sexual Assault?" A lunch and learn with DVAC. And so if anybody's interested, this is a free session. Just visit the Salina Public website, library website, and just register on there. We'd be happy to have people join in, ask questions. It's going to be pretty informal. We just want to get the word out there as to what it looks like and how people can support those that have been victimized. We also are, every month we recognize Denim Day, which is on the 28th. And that's a day where people can hopefully go to work with denim on, or just everyday life. And it represents a campaign after in the Italian Supreme Court in 1998, where a case was overturned because a victim was wearing tight jeans. And so the ruling was overturned because they thought, well, she must have assisted and therefore gave consent. So the cool thing is the next day, the women in the Italian parliament, they wore jeans the next day in solidarity with the rape victim. So to this day, that campaign has gone on every year to support victims and help stop victim blaming. So, and then lastly, Ad Astra, they've been wonderful. We're anxious to get things going again with our next Speak Night. So we're going to have that on the 31st at 7 p.m. The community's welcome to come to that, either to support victims or to read poetry or perform music. They can walk up, sign up the day of, or give DVAC a call, and we can get them on our list for that. Super exciting, and all month, Ad Astra is also selling a drink in our honor for DVAC. So it's a blueberry and cinnamon cream soda, I believe. Also Italian, so.
Awesome.
So yeah, we're excited. We really appreciate everybody's support in this town, and DVAC couldn't do what we do without the support from its citizens. So thank you so much. And
Well,
that's what we have for the most part. Other than that, our usual social media, we'll have all kinds of information up under DVAC.
Thank you and to DVAC for doing everything that you do to help women and children in crisis. And
Thank you.
you provide a tremendously valuable and unfortunately needed resource. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
And I
we-
have your
Thank you
signed
so much.
proclamation here.
We hope to work ourselves out of the job one day, but.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, I may have already messed something up today. I had mentioned to City Manager Mike Scragg before the meeting began that given the number of people here, and I suspect that most of you here to discuss the mask ordinance, that we possibly move the mask ordinance up in the agenda. Can we do that at this point, or am I already too late and we'll just get to it when we get to it?
I think if the other commissioners concur with you, you could certainly amend the agenda to take that up.
Is there any interest in doing that, or would you prefer to? Okay. And we need a motion on that?
I would move that we advance item 7.2. I'm sorry, not 7.2, 7.3 to right after the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to advance item 7.3, a review of the face mask ordinance, to be considered prior to item 7.1. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. That motion passes 4-0, so we will move that up in the order of business. So thank you very much for that. With that, we will go on to Citizens Forum. Citizens Forum is an opportunity for any member of the public to speak on any item that does not appear on today's agenda. You will have 5 minutes to address the commission, and we would ask that whenever you do approach the podium, keep your mask in place, and please state your name and where you're from. So with that, are there any folks here that would like to speak during Citizens Forum?
Norman Mantle, Salina, Kansas. Saturday at 4 o'clock, the news media reported in Maryland, the Bill of Rights for law enforcement have been removed. Limitations have been put in place, their conduct, their arrest powers reduced. We need to address that issue here in Kansas. Also, the news media reported that freedom of speech has been upheld at the Haskell Institute in Lawrence. Freedom of speech was banned, but the court overturned it. This was in the news media over the weekend. So I think we need to understand that we're violating our freedom of speech laws with some of the issues that the city has put in place. We can't say this, we can't say that, we can't do it in here. It's being overturned. The federal laws and constitutions are being implied or put in force. So I thought I'd bring that up to you because, like I said, it was put on the radio this weekend. Law enforcement need their powers reduced. We're getting too many people killed for no apparent reason. It's been happening again. In Idaho, law enforcement called a rancher out to come out and assist them. The rancher, it's open range in Idaho, and this man's bull had been injured. They called the rancher to come out and take care of it because it was on open range and his property. The rancher, his wife, and a family member arrived at the site. When he arrived, he assessed the situation. He decided the bull was badly injured. He needed to be put down. You know who got shot? It wasn't the bull. Law enforcement executed, assassinated this rancher. This needs to stop. Law enforcement is out of control all over the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mantle. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during Citizens Forum? And do we have anyone, if you are attending via Zoom and you'd like to speak, you can raise your virtual hand, or if you've got your camera turned on, you can wave at us and we will unmute you. Is there anyone indicating that they would like to speak, Mr. Wood?
I don't see any at this time, Mayor Hodges.
Okay. Well, with that, we will proceed. We don't have any public hearings or items scheduled for a certain time, so that will bring us to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of April 5th, 2021. Item 6.2, award contract for 2021 sidewalk ramps, project number 21006 to Lancaster Construction of Salina, in the amount of $43,510.50, with a $2,175.53 construction contingency, for a total project authorization not to exceed $45,686.03, and authorize the city manager to execute the contract.
Are there any items that a commissioner would like to have removed from the consent agenda? And if not, I'd move for,
Mayor, Commissioner Ryan here, I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Commissioner Davis, second.
we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. That motion passes 4-0. With that, we will proceed to item 7.3.
Item 7.3, face mask ordinance discussion.
Thank you.
Good
Good afternoon, Mr.
Commissioners,
Tiller.
Mayor, members of the public. So you should have in your packet the slides from the county commission last week. And then there was a slide I sent this afternoon. There we go. So just to go over a few updates, mainly in the information from what was presented last week. We currently have in the county, or have had 6,111 cases, which is 26 new ones since last week, 5,968 recovered, 35 active. Thankfully, no new deaths. We currently are not aware of any cases of COVID variants in the county. And total cases in the month of April are 42. As a point of comparison, That is significantly lower than where we were in July when face mask ordinances were initiated. In the vaccine update, if you remember a couple weeks ago, I had mentioned that we, as locals, were not able to extract information from the Kansas WebIZ system because that system was not specifically designed that way. KDHE has since then begun sending us weekly reports of all of the folks who, regardless of where in the state they got vaccinated, but listed a zip code that is in Saline County. So now we have more specific information. So from that, we've had, as of last Wednesday, which is when this report comes out, 14,977 that have received at least one shot. And on that report is also now some 16 and 17-year-olds, which means that original information, or the original goal where we had talked about a target of 70% of the adults, those 18 and over, and that reporting also has now been revised to include total population vaccinated. So at this point now, we're at about 28% of the total population of Saline County vaccinated. Now this week, the JCPenney clinic will close for providing prime doses. Part of that is due to the fact that there are multiple locations now to get vaccine and be able to get vaccinated. And it has become a little more difficult to get 900 to 1,000 people at one time. And so as of Sunday, anybody that's looking for where to get vaccinated can go to vaccinefinder.org, which pulls the information nationwide from all providers who are registered to provide vaccine, provides their location, their hours, their contact information, how to schedule. It will also show what types of vaccine they have on hand in order to get vaccinated in one of those places. That being said, however, the first one that you can get is still the best vaccine that you can get. Now that we are getting those data exports, we are also in the process of developing a dashboard similar to our cases dashboard that will show that information as well as the breakdown by race, age for those who are interested in seeing that information. For our cases, we still have 5 roughly full-time investigators who are committed to the pandemic response, and we have funding for those investigators at least for the next 18 to 24 months, should that be necessary. In the hospital, you can see that we have 3 current COVID patients. The 2-week percent positive rate is 3.23%, and with a 2-week incidence rate of 70 per 100,000. The recommendations, of course, that are in those slides that were provided to you are the recommendations that I made to the County Commission last week. Of course, that first recommendation is not quite valid as far as 70% of the adult population, but we would ascertain that trying to get as many people vaccinated is important in order to try and help with preventing the variants from being able to take hold here in Saline County. On the left-hand side of that slide that I provided you, that SITREP, is also the link to the KDHE dashboard, which they have now added a tab for showing where the where the variants are in the state that have been identified, what counties, how many variants there are, what types they are, as well as that is where the detailed information for much of the, it wasn't white. Well, or much of the, if you want to drill down into specific information such as testing trends, school gating criteria, which is what this hospital percent positive and the 2-week incidence rate all fall under. There is a significant amount of information on that dashboard area, and that's where a lot of the information that we consolidate into our updates comes from as well. And with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tiller. Questions from the commission?
Mr. Tiller, do we know by demographics, by age, maybe what percentage of the at-risk people have been vaccinated, like over 65 or?
With that export, I don't have that breakdown yet to be able to say I can tell you that breakdown. But with that export, hopefully we'll be able to show that. I just haven't been able to sit down and go through all of that in order to put into something that I can be able to share definitively.
Thank you.
But we will have that hopefully soon that we'll be able to
Well, I
share.
have read 80% for Kansas said over in that at-risk category, but.
Well, and even though the main vaccine clinic is closing, we will finish out the next few weeks of round 2 vaccinations there. And in addition to what he had up there for the vaccine finder in those locations, we are also still continuing to work with Salina family on a lot of smaller outreach clinics to try and target different populations around the city. So that was still ongoing. And as soon as we have that demographic breakdown, we'll definitely be able to share that.
Thanks.
Just sort of piggyback question. Will the information that you're breaking down now be able to give you address specificity as far as identifying neighborhoods that are wholesale deficient in percentage of people? being
Unfortunately, it gives us zip code.
vaccinated? Zip code only.
And that's, so it has, it's primarily de-identified. It has age, sex, race, ethnicity, and zip code as far as demographics information. And then it also has where they received their shot. So we'll, from that, as we are looking at it, we'll be able to get an idea too of how many vaccines are being done outside of the county, whether people are going to certain areas, if that's something that is of importance. Although in reality, we're not really concerned about where you get your vaccine at, whether it's here, Wichita, Johnson County, wherever. We're just concerned that you get it. That's all that matters.
And if, let's just say, if family wants to get vaccinated and they think their primary care physician's office would have it, should they still register through vaccinefinder.org? And if so, would that information obviously flow to their primary care physician, or should they?
So Vaccine Finder is a resource that can show them where a vaccine is at. So can you pull that back up, please? So you can see here that when you click on a location, it will tell you if they have vaccine in stock. It will give you their location, their phone number. Sometimes the view additional details will also tell you how to register for getting vaccinated. And that is the most, really most up-to-date site for that information, because it all is all flowing from the central vaccine tracking database, if you will, as far as where the vaccine is going and who's authorized to give it.
So that person would end up in the statistics from the state. If the person, the agency giving the vaccine, I'm assuming, is reporting back into the.
Right. So the agency, regardless of whether it's, one of those that's showing up in that radius, or if it's somebody in another part of Kansas, when you're filling out your paperwork, you're filling in your demographic information. And again, that all gets put into WebIZ. And then the state is able to pull all that, which is what they're sending to us with that breakdown by zip code.
Okay. Did you, what is your opinion now on your desire to get 70% of adults in the county vaccinated, or at what point would you consider us sort of, like a asymptotic curve on a geometry graph, as close as we're gonna get? I mean,
So in terms of 70% of the adults, before we had to change up our reporting to total population, we were at about, I think, 34, 35% of adults. As far as our ability to reach that, again, I think it's still a good target, of course, to reach 4. However, since we likely have vaccinated the majority of those who were, primarily wanting it initially, and now we're kind of getting into that area of those that are on the fence, who are hesitant about vaccine, trying to reach some of these populations that either are, aren't normally going to come into a provider's office or something like this. Trying to get to that 70%, even of the total population or even the adult population, is going to be much more difficult and take much longer at this point. So while it's going to be an ongoing effort, to say when we finally reach that 70% is, I think, quite a ways down the road.
Right, so do we let the number just drift over time at with its own momentum, or are we increasing our efforts to find those, let's say, 10 to 15% of people who just may not be part of the usual system, who may not be online or comfortable accessing a service?
Right, and we have already taken efforts trying to reach those additional people. You may have seen some of the smaller outreach clinics that are going to be down in the southern part of the county. There'll be one out near Tony's, I think on Thursday. Last week, there was one up by Salvation Army.
Right.
So we've already started trying to reach out to those groups. Some of the, not so much resistance that we're running into now, is that a lot of people are either wanting or waiting for the one-shot Johnson & Johnson, which logistically I get. It's one shot and you're done. But we still have plenty of vaccine of Moderna that we can be able to give as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Tiller, you mentioned that we were at one point at 34 to 35% of the adult population, and now we're 28 of the total population. If you were to massage those numbers, what percentage of adults would you say are currently vaccinated?
Well, based off that last report, I would say that we are still at about 34%, because that number I looked at last week was that 14,977. There was only about 10 or 15 16 or 17-year-olds on there. So I'd still say that we're about 34% of the adults.
Okay,
And so I don't have added into that yet anything that we have given since this report last Wednesday.
you mentioned that 14,977 had received their first shot. Does that include those that have received the one-shot Johnson & Johnson?
It does.
Okay, so we don't know how many are fully vaccinated. It could be more because some of them have had the one-shot Johnson & Johnson.
The report does go into to the extent of showing one shot, and then it also shows the second shot. And quite honestly, I just didn't have an opportunity to finish going in there and breaking all that down to show one shot versus two shots at this point. But we'll also have that on the dashboard hopefully later on this week.
Approximately how many people were we vaccinating a week at the, I call it the mass vaccinating site out at JCPenney?
We were doing approximately 800 to 1,000 a week previously.
And what's the capacity of the other locations in Celina to do on a weekly basis approximately?
Well, considering most of them are pharmacies, they don't have a lot of space. And I think they were getting maybe 200 to 300 doses a week potentially.
Between all of the...
Well, at each one, I think they were getting about 200 doses or so a week. The hospital has also been receiving doses, so they've started giving some to their CommCare locations as well. But just last week, we certainly struggled with filling 800 slots that we had for last week at the mass vaccination clinic. And this week, we were attempting to fill 300. I don't have a final report on whether we've got all of those filled yet.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a few questions here. First of all, very encouraging numbers, and also very encouraging that we aren't seeing any of the variants. As we have positive tests, are we testing to see if there are any variants in those positive cases?
So those, we don't see the actual, what we get is the lab result. And those labs are done at multiple different, or those tests are done at multiple different labs. Those labs in general are sending, I think, a random number of samples to KDHE for sequencing.
Okay.
If there is something that is an outbreak, if we see somebody that potentially may have had vaccine breakthrough, or that potentially tested positive and was symptomatic within 90 days after they had already had disease, then those types of cases we'll try and work with or contact the labs to make sure that those test samples are sent for genetic sequencing at KDHE. My understanding is they are also trying to up their amount of samples that they are sequencing to look for the different types of variants.
Gotcha. I know that nationally, we've seen some trends, like especially in Michigan, with the variants appearing, well, more contagious, but also seeing it show up in youth
younger
sports,
populations.
Yeah, and naturally their parents and things like that. I'd heard a report that there were some students that were sent home today from Lakewood Elementary or Lakewood Middle School that had been exposed. And so are we seeing younger people getting COVID, or is that something that hasn't reached us yet?
No, we have seen children of all ages, from infant all the way through to 100, 101,
Right.
that have gotten COVID throughout the pandemic. So to see some cases in kids is not unusual.
So we're not seeing that corresponding rise in more specifically youth cases
No.
at this point?
No.
Okay. Now, is the COVID task force that you and Mr. Scragg are a part of, are you still meeting weekly, pretty much?
Every Monday
I
morning.
mean, I call you guys the COVID task force. You may have your own name that you all prefer.
Yes, we're still meeting every Monday morning at 9
Okay.
a.m.
Is there a specific recommendation from the entities that make up that task force? And I mean, we're talking about, obviously, the health department, city, county officials, Salina Regional Health Center, Salina Family Health Care, USD 305. So you've kind of got a big mix of different people with different concerns. Has there been any recommendation formulated by that task force in terms of face mask wearing or face mask ordinance?
Well, not a formal recommendation per se from the task force. However, and Mr. Schrade can also attest to this, there has been voiced support from each of the members on there about continued mask wear. Whether it's realistic in some of their recommendations for another 4 to 6 weeks, I'm not so sure that whether that would be quite possible, given some of the level of resistance already. But I think one of our prevailing thoughts is that we are potentially a few weeks behind where many other places are right now, and that we could end up as many of these other states are that are seeing significant increases if we're not proactive about it.
Gotcha.
And if I could clarify a little bit, I would describe it more as a working group. There's
Yeah.
dialogue
sorry.
that is kind of advisory to Mr. Tiller as the health officer. There's not a lot of formality to it in terms of making a recommendation, or there certainly isn't any voting or motions. It's just dialogue for Mr. Tiller's
I gotcha.
edification, I guess you'd say.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification. And then I just have a couple questions in regard to next steps as we, whether or not we rescind the mask ordinance today or whether it's in place for whatever, another month or 6 weeks or whatever. Obviously, we're going to be in a post-mask, quasi-post-pandemic world in the months ahead. You said that we currently have the 5 tracers, contact
Correct.
tracers, and they will be here for the next, they will be funded, their positions will be funded for the next 18 to 24 months?
Correct, and I expect that there may be other COVID funding, but as of right now, depending on what the workload looks like, I can still support that for that 18 to 24 months.
And do you think that like the 5 contact tracers is going to be enough to keep on top of that? Because I know that, through no fault of your staff's own, I mean, they were pretty overwhelmed for a number of months just trying to follow up with folks.
Well, and at one point as well, when we were overwhelmed, we were getting 70 to 80, up to 100 cases a day. So even with, I don't think anybody statewide, even with the KDHE tracers that were being used, was really able to significantly keep up with that.
Right.
However, we do have those 5 who are well on top of it and well experienced so far in being able to handle the investigations. I also have my permanent staff who, if we have to surge, can be added to that. And we also have 2 or 3 others who had worked with us previously who have backed off now from contact investigations and case investigations that we can be able to potentially bring back on if that's necessary. Additionally, KDHE also still has some contact tracing capacity that if we should go through everything that we have and we have a continued surge, that we can request through the county emergency management and then be able to use that as well.
Okay. That's reassuring, very reassuring. If in the future, just looking down the line, tracing, doing this contact tracing in the future, I understand that the virus's timeline is pretty short, but has there been any thought to when we're reaching out to people who have been exposed to trying to preemptively vaccinate them before they develop symptoms, at least offering them that opportunity to be able to do that?
So my current understanding right now is those that are exposed or have active disease, my understanding is that they shouldn't be vaccinated until
They're well past that?
afterwards, at least 60 days or so afterwards.
Gotcha.
That might be extended a little bit more, but
Right.
and I understand where you're coming from as far as that's concerned. But right now, that's what the current recommendation is after they have finished their disease process.
Gotcha. And then I don't know if your working group has talked about this at all too, but once we have satisfied the vaccine demand, do you have any recommendations for employers? And obviously I'm thinking about this with my city hat on, but for policies for employees who decline to take the vaccine, which is their right to decline that, but recommendations for whether or not those employees who have direct contact with the public, whether or not they should continue to mask.
So you're saying that those who have not been vaccinated, who are having contact with the public, and whether they should mask?
And what I'm thinking about, and I may be misrepresenting this in terms of Celina Regional, but if you're a staff member at Celina Regional, I believe, and you opt not to have the flu vaccine, that's entirely within your purview to opt not to have it, but then you are required to mask during flu season.
Correct.
So I didn't know if there was going to be a similar recommendation, because obviously, like in the city's line of work, we have, we're talking especially about our first responders, they're having very close contact, with members of the public and also with their coworkers, like in the fire department setting where they're actually living together. And I didn't know if you had any recommendations as to that.
I am going to say no, simply because I think that really boils down to an organizational policy and potentially legal issues that should be discussed with council about what you can and can't do when it comes to, when you get down to that point.
Okay.
I think I go back to the, some of our original.
Key follow-up question, one that didn't write down well, I'll ask before I forget. If, as a physician, if I see someone who looks or sounds as if they probably are or recently were symptomatic and their test is negative, they to have their specimen of whatever type tested for the variants, is that something that can be requested of KDHE, or of whom would we request that?
So I
Okay,
think
mean,
you
I'm
might be
assuming that they would come up negative on the testing we're doing now, and that may be an incorrect assumption.
So KDHE's guidance has changed a couple of times on, especially somebody that may have had it. You're speaking somebody that had it before, or is this
Well,
somebody new?
someone symptomatic in the last 3 weeks.
Okay. Says with KDHE to be able to send that to them for that sequencing.
Okay.
So, but I think just a quick conversation with your lab to ensure what process they have. But I know that KDHE has mentioned that they are looking for samples, especially if there's something that you have a high index of suspicion, something just, doesn't look right in the presentation, that doesn't necessarily come up positive, but doesn't come up positive necessarily for anything else, like a rapid strep or something like that.
Okay, thank you. You use the term organizational policies, and that's a good term for my next question. As a hospital employee, I've been told that the policy at the hospital is not going to be changed or addressed until May 1st at the earliest. USD 305 would have its policy. I'm sure there are other organizations who would be motivated for safety of staff and their clients to continue certain policies. With large groups of persons, either work or otherwise, under different policies, I'm sort of afraid of the confusion that will amount if there's not some uniform policy that applies to most people in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Is it your understanding that USD 305 would prefer? On one hand, I'm told I don't need a mask in the county. But the next breath is, we highly recommend that you wear them when you're in certain situations. And, my simple, from his debating background, you are the the Trent Davis anointed logic expert here. But there's some inherent confusion in that action. Right? If you're going to tell me I don't need the mask, I'd like to hear a period at the end of that statement rather than the comma, unless we clearly define those situations in which the mask should still be used, in which case that should be part of the action.
So you're asking what my input on that one is, based on their decision?
Yeah.
Well, for one, I can't speak for the county commission, nor will I try to. But two, proactive in preventing surge or preventing variants side of what I can recommend. Does that make sense? I mean, masking is important. It's one of many things that's important as far as preventing the spread of COVID. The same goes for staying home, hand washing, social distancing. Really, whether you continue to leave the legal aspect in place and enforce masking is a decision of how you want to address this.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, before we open it up to the public, I just have one last question. When were the vaccinations opened up to all adults regardless of age or risk factor? That's been a pretty recent development, has it not?
Phase 5, I believe, was March 22nd, or was that? It's been in the last couple weeks. They did phase 3 and 4, and then a week later opened it up to phase 5. So it's been very, very recently.
So those that were in phase 5, just statistically, if they're lucky, they've been able to acquire their first dose, but because of the timing between the 2 doses, they obviously haven't gotten their second dose. So
Correct.
the people that waited their turn and got the dose or got the vaccination, they have not had the opportunity to become fully vaccinated yet. Correct?
You're talking about everybody prior to phase 5?
I'm talking about like the phase 5 people.
Oh,
just-
so,
yeah.
right, those that were in phase 5, if they wanted to get their first dose, they've
Yeah,
gotten their first dose.
they may have received their
They just
first
haven't
dose.
received their second one yet because
Gotcha.
that will still be another 2 to 3 weeks off depending on
Gotcha, thank
when they
you.
got it.
A follow-up to that is it my understanding that with the Moderna and the Pfizer, if you've had 1 dose, you're, 70 to 80% protected, and the second dose is actually a booster to that? It tries to get you up to that 90-some percent?
I unfortunately don't have those specific numbers in front of me, so I can't remember exactly what the percentages are. But you are, I think, correct in the assertion that second dose pushes you a little bit further, but you do still have some protection after that first one.
Mayor, one more question.
Yes, sir.
And this is just an opinion that I'd like to hear. I'm sure you don't have any data about it, but are those that are resistant to the mask or tend not to wear them, or is that the same group that doesn't want to get vaccinated? Do those 2 groups largely overlap, just from your vantage point of all of this?
I'm going to have to say I don't know. I haven't really looked at it enough to be able to give you an opinion on that one.
I get it, I just ask.
Yeah,
It occurs to me
I don't
that
really know.
2 cohorts overlap one another. but-
Mayor,
No, I think that's a great question because, yeah, I don't want to wear the mask any longer either. Hence the vaccination. I realize that's an individual call, but to me, it's kind of a logical sequence. I had that same thought.
Mayor and Commissioners, Deputy City Manager Jacob Wood prepared the staff report, and I think
Okay.
there is some additional information that might be worth going over before you go
Okay.
to citizens' comment.
Okay.
It discusses the statutory legislation that's taken place and some of the procedural aspects that you might have questions about and may factor into citizen feedback.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tiller, for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Mayor and Commissioners, Jacob Wood, Deputy City Manager. As Mike said, there are some things that have happened over the last couple of weeks that have actually kind of caused this discussion to come up, and it's not just the case numbers and things changing with vaccinations. There's been some changes in state law, particularly Senate Bill 40. When that bill became law, it actually regulates the ability of counties to do public health orders, and it also regulates the ability of the governor to pass an executive order. But one thing that it's kind of silent on is a city's ability to pass an ordinance. So our mask mandate or requirement for masks is passed by just a regular ordinance. It's something that we do all the time, that we do have authority by state law to do. Senate Bill 40 does not really affect that at all. So the current mask mandate that we have in place, it can continue to go until the governing body decides that it's no longer necessary. There's nothing illegal about it. The Senate bill doesn't change that at all. So, or Senate Bill 40 doesn't change that at all. There is one other Senate bill that we're tracking right now, and that's Senate Bill 286, and both of these have been things that City Manager Sprague has mentioned in the past couple of weeks. But Senate Bill 286 is something that would allow people who feel like they're aggrieved by a mask mandate or by any public health order to go back to those local government entities and try and get some relief through the legal system. What was most concerning about that is that would allow some businesses to say, hey, you put a mask mandate in place, that has caused me issues with my business, and it would allow them to claim that and then get some of their property taxes back. The significant part of that bill to us is that it said that it actually started on May 1st. It would say that any mask mandate that was in place May 1st and beyond would be something that somebody could complain about being aggrieved. I don't think at this point this bill is going to go anywhere. It's been heard in one committee. They moved it over to another committee. At this point in the session, I'm not really concerned that it's going to get passed, but if it were to get passed, we would probably need to take a look at our language. One of the things that it says specifically is that if the local government requires a business to enforce this mandate, that is something that they can say that is something that has aggrieved them, and our mask mandate does certainly say that you have to enforce it. We have not taken the stance that businesses are to enforce it on their customers specifically, but we have said that if you have employees, that you should have your employees follow the rules, and we have ticketed people. So that is something something to think about. That's something we'll track. If the governing body decides they want to continue with this mask mandate, and 2 weeks from now or a week from now we find out that Senate Bill 286 does pass, we'll certainly want to think about that again. So I don't think there's any other state legislation or any changes there that will affect the city that we really need to talk about. So really, your options are to not do anything. We can continue forward with the mask mandate that we have. You could, change the mask ordinance if you want to change the provisions. One of the things that I think people have talked about is, I've heard people say, well, I've had the vaccine, why do I still have to wear a mask? Well, we do not have an exemption for people that have had the vaccination. We do have other medical exemptions, but we don't have that. That's not listed in there, so that'd be something that you could consider. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of the legislation or anything else that's come up.
Mr. Wood, as an ordinance, this requires 2 votes. Are we at liberty to postpone second reading to any date, or not? I guess not postpone, but table. Can you put second reading wherever you choose?
Yeah, you certainly could delay the second reading.
And just as a clarification, that May date, that is the effective date if Senate Bill 286 passed, is May 1st of 2021. So we'd have an opportunity to size that up. It's not May 1st of last year. It's not retroactive, so you would have an opportunity.
And that may change, between now and the end of the legislation, they may change that May 1st date. It's really hard to say.
And following up on that question, so if we were to get word that that bill had passed and it was going to go into effect on May 1st, how long does it take us to rescind an ordinance at that point? Because we have to wait for publication in the newspaper of record, right? And so, it's not like passing an ordinance. You don't need 2 readings to rescind, right? It's just one action to rescind and then publication in the paper?
Go ahead.
First point, it does take 2 readings to rescind. It
Okay.
takes an ordinance to rescind, so thus the,
But we could do
The
the
2 readings.
emergency.
yes, that's
Okay.
true. And generally, I'll defer to the city clerk, but normally, a 3-day lead time on publication?
Yes, if it was passed on Monday and sent to the paper on Tuesday, it would typically be in the paper. And sent to the paper for publication, it would be in on Friday. That's generally the soonest we can get it into them. Sometimes Thursday, most of the time it's Friday.
Gotcha. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Wood? Well, if not, we will go ahead and open it up to the public. I might ask Commissioner Hoppick, could you switch the clock around a little bit so I can see the timer a little bit? I don't want to be, thank you so much, that'd be great. Yeah, that's perfect, thank you so much. We will open it up for public comment at this time. Please state your name and where you're from, and limit your remarks to 5 minutes, please. Is there anybody here that would like to speak on this issue?
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Wadke, Salina, Kansas. I would ask you, do you respect the Kansas Wesleyan University? Good school, wouldn't you say? My microbiology teacher at Kansas Wesleyan University taught us that masks will not stop a virus. He said that scientists that study viruses wear full-body suits with separate air supply, so they don't even have to breathe the air in the room with the virus. Now, granted, this was a few years ago before viruses became political, but we are not meant to breathe in our own respiratory waste, not to mention the mask fibers entering our lungs. Because of this mandate, many employees are forced to do this if they want to keep their jobs. Now, let's say for a moment that masks really do stop a virus. I don't believe it, but let's say they do. If that's the case, then those who wear a mask have nothing to fear from those who don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Is there anyone online who would like to speak? I see a couple of hands raised.
Yeah, we do have at least two online. Ms. Meyer, I'm going to go ahead and give you access here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't get the mute thing working. I'm Lene Meyer here from Salina, Kansas, and I do want to support continued mask mandate. I think it's Mr. Davis's comments were certainly informing, and Jason Tiller, he is our expert in this field for our county and cities. So I think we need to pay attention to what he's saying, what the stats are saying. The fact that there's an increase in cases is, I think, of a concern. And again, common sense and science rules as far as is what my belief is. And I challenge you and hope that you will continue the mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. Who are we going to acknowledge next, Mr. Wood?
Mr. Silverman, I will give you access now.
All right, Mr. Silverman, are you there?
Yes, this is Dr. Silverman of,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I live in Salina, Kansas, Dr. David Silverman. And I am calling in today in support of a continued mask mandate. I spoke to Mr. Tiller on Friday. He might recall that conversation, but a few things I'd like to bring up. During the 1919 pandemic, if you compared the cities of St. Louis, which is one of my hometowns, to that of Philadelphia, they suffered much less loss of life because they shut down earlier, stayed shut down longer, and came out of the pandemic with 1/3 of the deaths that the city of Philadelphia did, which closed later, stayed closed shorter, and reopened too soon. I'm reminded, and this is a parallel, if you've ever driven in the mountains on steep roads coming down and it says, stay cautious, 8 more miles of steep roads ahead because you might get into a lull. We've kind of hit that lull right now, but we have not gotten to herd immunity. And it sounds like there is some resistance in the community to do so. If we had shut down longer earlier, we might not be here today. But unfortunately, we've played games with this virus. This virus doesn't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. And we have now gotten to the point where it is mutating and variants are emerging. And the reason why we've had lower numbers locally is because of the mask mandate. The mask that I'm wearing now, probably if you were to come up right up on top of me, no, it's not going to stop a virus from penetrating, but it's preventing my breath from traveling more than a few inches from my face and the same from others. And that's what has kept this, our numbers down lately. But if we open up too soon and we rescind this too soon, Mr. Tiller's office will be overwhelmed. It'll take a couple of weeks for that to happen. But thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you, Dr. Silverman.
Okay, Melissa, I'll give you access now.
All right, Melissa, go ahead. If you could give us your full name and where you're from.
Melissa Hendricks here in Celina. I respect what Dr. Silverman just said, but there are studies coming out that are showing that mask mandates are only reducing the amount of cases by 1.8%. So when you're looking at cases of 6,000, it only reduces our number of cases by 100. That's minuscule. Okay? And you guys sat there last week, the commissioners sat there last week and said, well, it doesn't make any sense for us to do anything until we find out what the county is gonna do. Well, the county acted and the county rescinded theirs. So I hope that what you said last week wasn't just a bunch of lip service, because that's what it's sounding like right now. It's sounding like you don't care what the county did and you're gonna continue to do what you want to do. There is already resistance in the community. I watched a video of my daughter dancing at the Liberty game on Friday, I think it was, Saturday. And a lot of the people there were not wearing masks. It needs to be up to the individuals and the businesses as to whether or not they want to wear a mask. If a business wants to regulate that, that's their choice. Just like it's my choice not to shop there if I don't want to wear a mask. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. We're seeing resistance and nobody wants to do anything. The county commission finally took a step, and I'm asking you guys to follow suit. Like you said, you intended to do, you want it to be a joint effort, so let's make it a joint effort. Get the control back into the people. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Hendricks. Is there anyone else online who would like to speak? Because we've already had Dr. Silverman. Is there, and final call for anyone here who would like to speak to this issue?
Hey guys, Chad Farber from here in Salina, and I appreciate you making accommodations, moving it, this mask ordinance discussion up a little bit. I appreciate that, Mayor. To reiterate what Ms. Hendricks just said, cases continue to go down, and we even received the latest report from Mr. Tiller. And by the way, Mr. Tiller has done a pretty good job through all of this, and I respect him for what he has done. One of the illustrations that he gave to us at the county commission meeting on last week was a Swiss cheese, I forget the exact name of it, but there were many different layers to fighting this virus. And each of them was a slice of Swiss cheese that had holes in them. The mask was part of it, hand washing was part of it, distancing was part of it. And when you put all of those together, it was our best fight against this virus that we're fighting. And I agree with that. It's not a one-layer defense. It's a many-layer defense. And I believe that we here in Saline County and Celina are taking the correct steps to fight this virus. We don't need to be mandated to wash our hands. We don't need to be mandated to stay at home if we're sick. We've been practicing that for years when it comes to flu, when it comes to sickness, and so forth. All I am asking is to remove the mandating of the mask wearing. The other term that Mr. Tiller used, and Mr. Davis liked it as well, I can't remember exactly what it was, the occupational decisions. That's probably what it's going to come down to anyway. Each business will determine, whether their employees wear a mask, whether those that come through the doors will wear masks, and I'm fine with that. But we as a governing body, or you as a governing body, should not mandate the wearing of individuals by that. Individuals can make their own decisions. We've seen down in Texas, cases have dropped since the mask mandate has been allowed to expire or rescinded in that case. And even Dr. Fauci this past week was asked, what's the reason for that? Can you explain that? And he said, I have no explanation for it. But the explanation is this: we as individuals want to protect ourselves, and we can do it with our own choices and with our own decisions. So like Ms. Hendricks said, I think it should be an individual choice. And I appreciate the county commission making their decision that they did last week. And I think it would cause a lot of confusion in our communities if we had a county commission with one decision, a city commission with another decision. And so I would implore you, follow suit, just take the mandate away, but use the same recommendation like Mr. Tiller is saying. We recommend to protect yourselves, be it with a mask, be it with hand washing, be it with distancing, whatever the case may be. But I appreciate you guys listening to me, and have a great Monday evening.
Thank you, Mr. Farber.
Gary Welch, Salina, Kansas. I'm a pharmacist. I've dealt with science since the first grade. I have had the virus. I had a positive test. I've been vaccinated. First time, I've been vaccinated the second time, 3 weeks later at the Penny's site. I feel that Dr. Fauci has flip-flopped since day one. He says, follow the science. First he said, no masks. Then he said masks. Then he said double masks. Then he said triple masks. Recently, he said, if you've been vaccinated, even 4 weeks later, you should not go to a restaurant inside or outside. That's just within the last day or two. These businesses are suffering from all of these mandates. I just want to say that I think the mandate should be dropped. Like the previous speakers have said, we can wash our hands, we have common sense, we know what to do. If we want to protect ourselves, that's fine, but I believe that the mandate should be rescinded. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. All right, if there's no one else to speak, I will bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action.
Chairman, speak into the mic. We can't hear it back.
Oh, I'm sorry, is that better? Yes. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. All right, with that, we'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action. And, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I guess somebody's got to go first. As mayor last year, we put the mask mandate into effect, and I believe that was the correct thing to do at that time. And one of the comments I made is that I was not concerned as much about the number of cases as I was about hospitalizations and deaths, and about flattening the curve, which I believe we've done a good job of. I'm not sure with COVID that we'll ever hit 0 cases over a week, a month time. If we remove the mask mandate, we're not outlying masks. I do agree that each individual and business can set their own policies. As a business owner, I will respect anyone that comes into our office wearing a mask. We will do the same in respect of their wishes. I believe schools, hospitals will continue to require their employees to wear masks. I could see servers at restaurants, might help their patrons. Again, I believe a majority of those at risk have been vaccinated. I kind of feel like we've got a little bit of mask fatigue going on at this point. I think we made the comment several months ago that we probably had a 95+% of the individuals following the mask mandate. I do not feel like we're there now. We have students wearing them in school, but if you go to after-school activities or out and about, the students are, in close proximity, again, not wearing masks. Saw a lot of pictures, nice pictures of individuals that went to prom this weekend. A lot of masks were not being worn. I've had some people tell me, you need to continue the mask mandate, and I'll go and I'll see them sitting at a table with 9 or 10 other people that they do not live with. And I tell them, if you're really concerned about it, why are we sitting in close proximity to these individuals? And they really didn't have a good answer. It was kind of do as I say, not as I do. And I think that's what we're seeing some. However, whether we rescind the mask mandate or don't, I would hope the public would treat one another with respect, whether you are pro-mask or anti-mask, is what I would ask of the community. I will make a motion here in a little bit. I'd like to hear from the other commissioners.
Commissioner Ryan here, I'll second.
I'm not making one. I'm just,
No,
I
he's
said
making the
I want to
motion,
hear the other commissioners, and then I'll.
Yeah, Commissioner Hoppick just wanted to know if any of us wanted to share our thoughts.
Well, I agree with all the things Commissioner Hoppick has said. He summed it up pretty nicely as far as I'm concerned. I think the public needs a target, and they need an end date to this, to the masking, and I think we need to provide them that at this point.
I will certainly agree with part of that as far as the target and the end date. I looked a couple of weeks ago to see which states Kansas was still quarantining visitors from. After March 12th, it's New Jersey, New York. After March 26th, Delaware, Michigan, Rhode Island. 4 days ago, Connecticut or Pennsylvania. If you've traveled there since April 8th, you have to be quarantined. And I'm hoping we don't fall into that false sense of security that comes with wide open prairie and plenty of space, and what self-respecting germ would want to come to Kansas? I mean, we're nice people, they're not going to bother us. And, we found out that wasn't the case. It liked Kansas just like it liked all the other places. We may well be a good example of what social distancing does, because our population density is lower, so that probably works to our advantage. So we start out somewhat naturally socially distanced. Anyway, when I get rid of this mask, I like to take my full supply and go burn them. I don't want to have to go back, all right? Because psychologically, I tell you, it's going to be a lot harder to go back to the mask than it is to keep wearing it. There are a lot of people in town who wear a mask at work. People at Tony's Pizza wear a mask. A lot of hospital employees, even when it's not flu season, have to wear masks because of what they do. Obviously, folks in operating rooms wear them all the time. I had this thing on yesterday from 8:30 in the morning to 10:30 at night. I was real sick. I couldn't wait to get to my car to drive home so I could roll the window down and just breathe in deep. But I'm really hesitant about concerned about mixed messages. If a person comes to town to visit a relative at the hospital, there's one set of rules. They go to a restaurant that requires maskless to get in. They go to one that doesn't. I mean, they could have 10 different rules in the space of 3 or 4 blocks. School will be out in about 5 or 6 weeks. God forbid an outbreak occur in school, because schools are quietly one of the biggest determinants of the availability of our local employees. If kids are sick at home, parents got to stay home, or at least make some alternate arrangements. I'm assuming parents have made whatever arrangements they're going to make for summer already anyway, so that would not be any different. I mean, most parents they're going to have to do something with their kids when school lets out. I just see, a month out is enough time to tell if indeed we are getting ready to face an uptick. Certainly if the curve stays where it is now, we should feel real comfortable about it. School will be out. Then as a community, the major institutions in town, schools, hospitals, and I don't know where they rank in employment, but probably Tony's Pizza would be the third of those 3. But, 2 of the largest 3 employers would perhaps have a policy meeting that might, coalesce. Now, the hospital will probably always be different, just because if you want to find the people who are sick with it, no better place to go to find them. So our restrictions may persist a bit longer. But we're going to have better weather. It's easier to stay outside, socially distance, and we hope we can squeeze some more people through the vaccination line. Wearing the mask sometimes is a symbol, and what may have cut down a lot of the transmission in schools and in hospitals and in churches, and it's because I'm sure most of us have washed our hands more in the last year than we have in the last 10 years combined. I'm losing the skin on the knuckles on my, literally, from all the wash. I mean, I have to wash them anyway, but it seems like it's 10 times as much washing and alcohol in my hands now than it was before. So, yep, that Swiss cheese analogy is it's a very good one. You know, they're all layers, but each layer has some deficiencies. And if you put them together, Jacob, could I get you to put up my, this was, it's not original. My nephew in Washington, D.C. sent it to me. And it's coming. It's just, I was always taught that pictures or the other one. Yeah. But that one just says, the pandemic isn't over just because you're over it. You know, there are some people who, but this is, you know, why you should wear a face mask. And the analogy, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but if a guy is running around naked and somebody pees on you, guarantees 100% you're going to get wet. If you're wearing pants and somebody pees on you, some people get through, but not as much. But if the guy who pees is also wearing pants and you're wearing pants, your chances of getting wet or getting materially affected by that pee goes way, way down. So are masks the panacea? Probably not, but do they help? Yeah, but they're also a reminder to us to engage in those other healthy behaviors. And believe me, you know, I'll probably find some people want to sponsor a party downtown when we really feel like we're over this. But I just don't want to do it too soon or send out mixed messages. I just see the end of school as a very conveniently approaching target date. You know, where maybe as a community we can take a step forward. I'm done. I think you're
Okay.
left, yeah.
Thank you. Basically, the only thing that I have to add is something that I've responded to in virtually every email I've gotten regarding masks has been the criteria that is important for me to support rescinding a mask ordinance, and the primary one of those is that we have either reached our target goal of 70% of adults in Saline County, or that we can demonstrate that the vaccine demand has been met. And I think at this time, obviously, we know the percentages aren't there, and I still think it's too early to see whether or not we've reached a plateau or that we aren't going to be able to vaccinate any more people, especially when the people who make up Phase 5 have only recently become eligible to receive their vaccinations. We all serve our different constituents, and we all have different contacts in the community. But just speaking for myself, I'd say probably 75% to 25% of the emails that I've gotten have been in support of keeping the mask mandate in place. And the one that made the most, that resonated the most with me was the joint letter that we received that was signed by USD 305, Kansas Wesleyan, I believe Salina Tech. It was basically the major educational institutions in our community. And they said that masking was really important to keep in place because they know that the work that they do is all predicated on being able to continue what they're doing, especially having the kids there in person. So if mask wearing is truly important to maintain, I don't see any reason to rescind the mask ordinance at this point, just because it also allows those businesses who want to keep their customers and their employees masked. It gives them kind of a backstop, a rationale, if you will, to keeping that policy in place. And if this is one of the layers of Swiss cheese that keeps us from falling through the next layer and the next layer and the next layer, then from where I'm sitting, it makes sense to keep it in place for the time being. And so with that, I will
Okay.
turn to Commissioner Hoppick.
I did also, we all received the letter from the schools, and, as I read that, I thought, that, again, schools can keep them in place. I don't believe we've had schools become a super spreader during this, so don't know where this will go. I do believe as a kind of a compromise, we do have a first and a second reading, and I would move that we approve ordinance number 21-11058, amending the action to have the second reading fall on April 26th. That will give us an extra week. That'll give us 2 weeks to see where our numbers are.
Is there a second?
I'll second that, Mayor, now.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number, sorry, I've got all my pages out of order here, 21-11058, setting the second reading date for April, what was
26th, I believe that
April?
would be 2 Mondays from now, correct?
April 26th. All right, is there any further discussion?
I would say only that doesn't get you to the end of school.
Understood.
All right, could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Nay.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Nay. So having 4 commissioners, this is the issue that you get into with 2 commissioners voting in favor and 2 against, that motion fails. So I'm not sure what further direction that we want to give to staff at this point, but for now, the face mask ordinance will remain in place. And that's something that we can think ahead to to figure out where we want to go from here. But I concur that, to me, the end of school is what I'm looking at. And I don't know that if we want to address that now, or if that's something that we want to take up again in a few weeks. And I'm going to look at Commissioner Davis, since he was the other dissent, to see what his thoughts are.
If anyone knows when school closes, whichever Monday comes after that.
I do not know that off the
I
top
don't
of
know
my head.
if Superintendent
certainly-
Exline put it in her letter or not.
I don't,
No.
And not the,
We're not allowed to use our computers, our phones, but if you have that data, I appreciate it.
Per the calendar, last day for students is 27 May, last day for teachers is 28 May.
They go to May 27th?
Yes.
Well, that's a long school year.
that is long.
But I guess that would be 6 weeks from now.
that is a Thursday. The following Monday is Memorial Day, so your next meeting would be June 7th.
Well, we could do the Monday before, and the second reading would be the day.
Actually, if you approved it on the 24th and it published on that Friday, then that would be the day following the last day of school. So May 24th would correspond
I'm
with the end
sorry,
of
I have to
school.
look at my calendar. I can't think without my calendar.
Okay.
We could also
It
pass it,
sounds good to me. I'm just waiting for the
you could
mayor.
also pass it with an effective date and go through the readings now.
My concern with that, though, is if we go ahead and rescind it with an effective date of X, I think people are just going to hear the mask ordinance has been rescinded. I mean, I get it. It's an excellent point. But I guess I would propose that we take it up again at the meeting on the 26th.
That'd be the 24th.
Oh, I'm sorry, the 24th. I was still in April.
Or the other
I-
option would be to call a special meeting just for
Yeah,
that.
I would guess that I would say we would hold off, and perhaps Commissioner Franz will be back, and we might take it up when we have 5 commissioners at that time.
That's really, that's smart.
Yeah, I did want to follow up on that.
Absolutely.
If Commissioner Franz is available, replace it on your agenda.
That sounds good.
I agree.
Thank you. All right, we will move backward in time then.
Excuse-
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we could still place it on our agenda and move it up or back when he returns, though. True. I mean, at least we would have
Yeah,
something other, it's not a nebulous plan, it's a good idea, but we would have some concrete action intended when we walk out of here today, that unless we take it up sooner, we plan to take it up on a certain day.
the concern with Commissioner Franz returning is I'd hate for it to require an additional action to place on your agenda. If we're in agreement that if it's apparent that he will be in attendance to place it on that agenda, then the staff can prepare the agenda item in the packet accordingly. And then if you also will then want to set a date kind of at the outer limit of May 24th to take it up to correspond with school, you could do that as well.
Okay, I hear that, but I don't know why the 4 of us could not act now to place it on a future agenda.
No,
Because, I mean, we would always have the opportunity to change the date of the.
I agree with
agenda
you.
item.
If you wished, you could set a date for it to return to your agenda. And then my suggestion would be that you also provide guidance that in the event that Commissioner Franz is available in advance of that date, that staff is authorized to place it on the next available agenda.
I would like that way, I know that this is, there's a date certain at the
Right.
latest that this is going to come back and we're going to take action.
Is that acceptable to the other commissioners?
Yes.
Yeah, as long as that wording's in there, or
Right.
if, okay.
Okay, so do we need a motion to that effect?
It might not hurt.
Okay.
What I heard was to instruct staff to place it on your May 24th agenda for consideration, and also authorize staff to place it on the next available agenda if it's apparent that Commissioner Franz will be in attendance at an upcoming city commission meeting.
I'll enter that as a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to move the mask ordinance. I'm not even going to try to repeat what Mr. Scraggs said, putting the mask ordinance on, well, now here I go. Mask ordinance on the May 24th agenda unless the return of Commissioner France allows it to be placed on an earlier agenda.
Mayor,
Yes.
may I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Again, back to the 2 reading aspect. Is if the 24th was in anticipation of publication
Mm-hmm.
to correspond with the date of school ending,
Mm-hmm.
do we
That
need?
does presume you'd be declaring a compelling public interest in doing 2 readings on that same date. Or you could do it on the 17th, first reading on the 17th and second reading on the 24th. I guess, given the mayor's point about confusion,
I'd pref-
Personally, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
just do it on one day and be done with it.
Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Could I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye, and that passes 4-0. Now, we'll go back to item 7.1. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mr. Tiller.
Mayor, do you want me to read all 7.1 all the way down to D at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just,
Get it all, okay.
go for it.
Okay. Item 7.1, authorized sale of general obligation internal improvement bonds, Series 2021-A, and temporary note Series 2021-1. 7.1A, receive report on bids received on sale of bonds and notes. 7.1B, second reading of ordinance number 21-11055, authorizing the issuance and delivery of general obligation internal improvement bonds, Series 2021-A. 7.1C, Resolution Number 21-7947, prescribing the form and details of and authorizing the delivery of general obligation internal improvement bonds, Series 2021-A. And 7.1D, Resolution Number 21-7946, prescribing the form and details and affirming the delivery of general obligation temporary notes, Series 2021-1.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Debbie Pack, Director of Finance. Today's action is a culmination of several months of work by city staff, our bond advisors, Gilmore and Bell, and our financial advisor, Stiefel Nicholas, to finance our capital projects and purchases for the city. One thing I did want to mention, I'm not going to go into great detail because we've been over these projects multiple times. I did want to mention that we did have a bond rating call on March 23rd, and Moody's confirmed the city's AA3 rating, which is the 4th highest rating available from Moody's. We do have Dave Arterberry here from Stiefel Nicholas. I'm going to go ahead and let him give you the report on the bids that we received today at the closing of the bonds and notes. The closing of these will actually happen on April 29th. That's when all the funds will be transferred. But I'll let Dave give you that report real quick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, and congratulations again on having your rating affirmed by Moody's. Both Debbie and Mike did a really good job of presenting the city and its credit to Moody's. So it is, anytime you can preserve in this economic environment a good, solid AA2 rating, you're to be commended on that. So as Debbie mentioned, today the city received bids on the notes and the bonds. Bids were due on the temporary notes up until 11 o'clock this morning. And the city, I'm pleased to report that the city ended up getting a total of 5 bids for the notes. The bids range from an interest rate of 0.249% to an interest rate of 0.362%. That was the lowest bid, the best bid, versus the highest bid. The low bid was submitted by TD Securities, and that was the interest rate of 0.249%. That bid was reviewed to make sure that it complied with all of the bidding parameters, and it did. And they also, TD Securities, provided the required good faith deposit, which equals 2% of the size of the issue. So that was a good bid, and we see no reason that the city wouldn't want to proceed and accept that bid. Then at noon, the city received bids for the general obligation bonds. And that issue size was originally at $8,145,000. And you ended up receiving a total of 8 bids on that. The best bid was submitted by the Baker Group, which is out of Oklahoma, and their interest rate was 1.637691%. And that's
Can you
that's
be more
for
accurate, please?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That interest rate is higher than the notes because the bonds are a 20-year issue and the notes are only a 1-year transaction. That bid was, again, like the bid on the notes, it was reviewed and verified that it was mathematically correct and met all the bidding parameters. They also provided their good faith deposit. That bid, after it was mathematically verified, that bid did contain what we call a premium. They were willing to pay the principal amount of the issue plus a premium over that. And because that premium isn't needed to pay the project costs, that premium is actually used to reduce the bond issue size. And this is something the city has historically done on its bond issues, is reduce the size of the issue based on that premium. And so the final issue size is $7,645,000. So just a reduction of about exactly in this case, $500,000. So that bid, again, it's a complying bid, the lowest interest rate out of the 8 bids, and we see no reason that you wouldn't want to accept that bid also. So obviously, welcome any questions you have. I'm real pleased, again, with the results of the sale. And the market, it was really nice and stable. I think that was part of the reason why you were able to attract so many bids, as well as your good rating.
Mr. Advocate, my question really isn't about the bids, although probably all of us wish we could get rates that low for our home. Was in the rating, were there any comments made about our general, what's the word?
General fund?
Reserve fund, I mean, balance, yeah, I mean, regarding whether it was healthy enough, or just, or any comments at all, just to kind of, so we'd know kind of where we're sitting?
I'll let Mike chime in too, but one of the things, you always hear in real estate, location, location, location. Honestly, in my opinion, with ratings, it's fund balances, fund balances, fund balances. That really is the one thing that they look at, that they know you as a governing body can control. You can't control, in a lot of cases, your population or your economy. So fund balance is very important, and they definitely did notice the trend you've had in the last few years of building those fund balances up. That had been a concern of theirs in the city for a number of years, but that sort of reversal and that growth of the fund balance was definitely noted during the rating calls.
Thank you.
Our prior rating was AA3
Right, yeah.
too. Yeah.
Do we need, when we take action, do we need to note the specific numbers in
Debbie will
each
walk
of?
you through
Okay,
that.
good, walk
I did
slowly.
mention also that we also have Mitch Walters from Gilmore and Bell here, and instead of Gina, it's not, but he's doing as good a job as Gina is. So if you had any questions specific about the bonds or the issues themselves, so he is available. We do have 3 action items. We have the Ordinance 21-11-055, which we'll be doing on second reading. We will change the amount on that to the 7.645, correct? And we have the standard options to approve, to amend, to postpone, and to vote to deny. We have Resolution 21-7947, which basically just tells us the form and the details of the bonds. Also changing that amount to $7,645,000. And then we have Resolution number 21-7946, which prescribes the form and details of the temporary notes, and that amount did not change. It's $5,230,000.
Thank you,
And we do need 3 separate actions on those.
thank you. I'm sorry, any questions, any further questions from the commission? If not, great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here today, too. We'll open it up for public comment. If there's any member of the public that would like to comment on this, please feel free to come to the podium and state your name and where you're from. No takers? This is bonds we're talking about, people. It's bonds. Okay. And it doesn't look like there's any hands being raised online either. With that, I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action.
Mayor Hodges, I move we approve ordinance number 21-11055 on second reading, authorizing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $7,645,000 principal amount of general obligation internal improvement bonds, Series 2021A.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve on second reading, ordinance number 21-11055. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick?
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan?
Aye.
Mayor Hodges?
Aye. That motion passes 4-0. All right, which brings us to resolution number 21-7947.
Mayor Hodges, I move we approve resolution number 21-7947, prescribing the form and details of the authorizing the delivery of $7,645,000 principal amount of general obligation internal improvement bonds, Series 2021A.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 21-7947. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick?
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan?
Aye.
Mayor Hodges?
Aye. That motion passes 4-0. All right, you can take
Yes,
the last one, too?
I'm on a
We're on a roll.
I move we approve, Mayor Hodges, I move we approve resolution number 21-7946, prescribing the form and details and affirming the delivery of not to exceed $5,230,000 principal amount of general obligation temporary notes, Series 2021-1.
Second.
Is that, excuse me, that says 2020-1, is that correct? Should be 2021-1, shouldn't it? Okay.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 21-7946. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye, that motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much for being here this evening, gentlemen.
Love those interest rates.
Yes, yes. All right, which brings us to item 7.2.
Item 7.2, first reading charter ordinance number 40, exempting the city of Salina from the provisions of KSA 12-1697 and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to the promotion of tourism and convention, authorizing the levying of a transient guest tax by cities and repealing charter ordinance number 35.
Thank you. Mr. Wood?
Yeah, Mayor Commissioners, Jacob Wood, Deputy City Manager. I'm not going to go through the entire report as I did last week. This topic was discussed 1 week ago, and the Commission made a motion that we postpone it to tonight in order to provide notice to the hoteliers. That was done last week. We sent an email out, didn't have time to get a letter drafted in the actual mail, but we did send an email out. And then I think the Chamber also, we anticipated the Chamber would provide some correspondence, and they did that as well. The ordinance that you have attached here is a charter ordinance, so it does take a supermajority, which will be 4 commissioners, to be approved. And what it does is it sets the top limit of the transient guest tax rate at 8%, and later on you would take additional action to actually set the rate where you would want it to be. I'd be happy to take any questions, and Eric from the Chamber is here as well if you have questions or want to hear from him.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Mr. Brown, would you like to speak?
Sure. Good evening, mayors and commissioner, mayor and commissioner. I agree that it's great to see the bond rates where they're at from your side of the table and see some of those savings coming back to the taxpayers. That's excellent to see at that point. You did receive an email from myself on behalf of the Chamber. So I just kind of want to reiterate that a little bit, not fully read that, but state that point. We continue to be supportive of the Baseball Enterprises project. Obviously, it generates a significant amount of visitor and tourism dollars that enhance our community. The other thing it does, it also enhances the residents' quality of life and allows the local community to utilize upgrades in those fields as we look at that. Based on feedback from our board and the hoteliers that responded to us, there was consensus about utilizing both an increase on transient guest tax and also the city allocating funds towards the project that would be more of a amenable solution, meaning that we are not advocating for the full raise of the 1.3%, if at all possible. These upgrades keep our facilities competitive across peer communities and also allow Celina to retain the quality tournaments and championships currently with us, and also bid on tournaments that we have not seen previously. So that keeps us competitive that way. And also these upgrades provide local users, like I said, a quality experience. So based on the city staff report, if the transient guest tax was raised that 1.3%, that rate and total taxes would put Celina in the top 10 highest total transient guest tax and total tax rate in cities over 12,000 population. The majority of those cities actually are in the Kansas City market as well. The back end concern of this is, after talking to obviously Visit Celina and our division there, the effect that this would have on the very competitive convention and meeting market. That convention and meeting market already was competitive, and if we are towards the top tiers in the state, that could be a detriment to our ability to host association meetings, conventions, things of that nature. So with that, I will address questions. I also have Sylvia Rice, because there are details that I'll let her tackle that way. So,
Thank you.
I guess I'm going to ask the same question I asked last week.
Yes.
There's no argument about the value of the Baseball Enterprises project. I mean, I don't see any real holes in the project. Just have to find a way to pay for it. And I guess I'm still not sure if I'm hearing that the Chamber Board is supportive of the increase. I understand that part of your membership would have a reason not to want the tax to raise.
Right.
And another part of your membership will benefit from the results of this money being diverted towards a baseball field. Because at the end of the day, we have to find the money
Right.
to pay for all this.
So is the question if the chamber is supportive of?
Supportive, yeah, 'cause I mean, the last thing you said was that it might have a negative, unless I'm misinterpreting, it might have a negative impact on attracting convention business.
Well, just like anything else, it's very competitive. The Chamber Board is, and the Chamber, we are supportive of the project. I think, raising that transient guest tax, anytime you look at a 15 to 20-year tax levied, there's always a lot of concern with that from the standpoint of what that does to our total taxes. But, visit Salina, obviously, we have the contract with you all to do that work. Having these types of fields allows more tournaments to come in, allows the restaurants, the retailers, the convenience stores, the hoteliers to continue to do what they do in their market and raise those commerce dollars that are paid when folks come to town.
So my take-home message would be that the hoteliers are supportive of this because the
take-home
tournaments
message
will bring them more rooms net.
The
because of
hoteliers that have responded to us, they did indicate that they feel like this is a good project. They are supportive of the project. They like to see, because they do receive teams that come in. And when you have 100 and sometimes 120 team champion or tournament, that does put a lot of people into hotel beds here in our community.
So they are supportive of the tax going up to
They
fill
would be
those bids?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Are they supportive of the tax going up as they try to fill those bids?
They're supportive to the point where it's not only them, it's not only the hotel industry receiving that tax. I think that would be a fair assumption or fair statement from the hoteliers we've heard from.
Thank you.
So just to confirm real quick, just to follow up. So the hoteliers are supportive but at the same time, they don't want this to be the sole funding mechanism, and they aren't supportive of it if we have to use the entire 1.3 increase.
Right.
Okay.
I think so. I don't have a good cheese analogy for that, but
Well, how are we supposed to understand it? I mean,
Right.
without cheese.
but I think that is the it's like in Mr. Weilert's letter, you all received that a week ago or over a week ago.
Did we?
In the
Are you
previous-
referring to one from Monica Baltazar?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Monica
yes.
Baltzer, I'm sorry. And the properties south, that was his platform as well.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners for Mr. Brown or Ms. Rice?
Well, it's probably more of an internal conversation among the commissioners and our staff as to where, if the entire 1.3% or whatever increase there is not used for this project, where's the rest of that money coming from?
Again, we have until, I'm not sure what date, again, I didn't write it down from last week, but approving this now gives us a maximum 8% as we analyze the size of the project, because I think the scope has maybe changed a little bit. and we look at other funding mechanisms, is when we will, at some point, set that transient guest tax to a hard number, correct? I'm looking to city staff.
Yes, the
Yeah.
timeline on the front page of your staff report has the first and second reading of the ordinance to set the rate at August 31st.
Right, so we still have some play in there. And you know, we're allocating money, and then we're going to say, well, let's see how much of this money we need to spend. I'd kind of like to know what the project's going to cost to see if we can afford it, and then figure out which sources of money we're going to use for it. Now,
And
unfortunately, our strategic planning session, I wish it was last week when I was mistaken, because then we would already had this conversation. We put the cart in front of the horse, or the horse in front of the cart here?
Well, I think, yeah, and I'm speaking for Commissioner France to some extent, but I think part of the discussion previously was to go ahead and to get this in place so that the wheels were in motion to be able to generate revenue and to estimate what that might be, and then we can talk about what that might fund in the way of a project. If you truly want to know a project scope and budget, that's well beyond August 31st by the time we, decide that, prepare it in detail and put together a budget. My take was that, this was to kind of get the conversation moving, get the revenue in place so we then could flesh out the rest of those project details.
Right, but we have a rough idea. I mean, we knew that the money that this generated would just about equal the annual payments on the anticipated debt for the
Right, but in terms of
project.
scoping the project and, preparing a detailed budget, we've yet to do that. We have a target, a budget number, a target number, but it's not to any high level of detail.
Right, so, and I understand moving the process along. My concern is that once you give a certain amount of energy to a process like that, the pressure on us or the pressure on the private part of the consortium to come up with other sources of income is deflated tremendously, because everybody knows in the back of the mind, well, if worse comes to worse, we can go up to 8. When you don't know that you're going to get 8, you work a little harder to try to find the pieces to fill in the gaps.
I understand your point. That's probably where I back out, and you as the governing body take on that conversation.
That didn't help me any. Okay. But you're true. I understand what you're saying.
The good thing is, we're not going to have a change in commission between now and then. So we know where we stand as a group, so I don't see that, If you had new commissioners
Many
coming
of our
in 2
offices
months, I
are
could see that being an issue, because they would maybe take a different view, but
Right. So somewhere between now and then, we still have to come up with double this amount for the escrow fund.
that's
Yeah.
that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, but, you don't buy a Porsche if you can't afford the gas. We will have bought the car, but no way to take care of it.
But
We need to have some idea, and that's,
But we've,
Those are things we can
as a commission, we've already shown our support for this. Now to say we're not sure
Oh,
how to fund, I mean, it's kind of,
well, no, this
Backtrack.
is not about support for the project, but it's about committing ourselves to buy something that we can't keep up. At least I ought to have some idea, what our options are before we get it. Because once we buy it, we're obligated to replace those fields in 10 years. And it'd just be nice to have some idea of where we think we're going to get that money from. Again, project's great. We just have to and these are things you can discuss in a strategic planning session, what pots of money do we have, or how are we going to approach, because every year we're going to get a fantastic project. We've already had, 2 or 3 this year.
and there's no guarantee that we will have 100% of the funds to replace the turf. There may be some debt financing that's required.
Right, but that's the same situation we're in with our trucks and equipment in Public Works. We haven't planned to replace the equipment. And now, 15 years later, it's going to fall on us to develop a plan to replace those trucks. I mean, instead of the trucks in 10 years, it's going to be, I got ready to call it AstroTurf. I'm really dating myself, but artificial, whatever it's called, artificial turf. Just leave it at turf. But, and that issue is strictly speaking not related to getting this ball rolling, but I've seen what happens when you give a big ball a little bit of a push going downhill. Nothing stops it. And we just need, before that ball hits the bottom of the hill, to know where the rest of that money is coming from, or at least have some idea of what type of conversations we're going to have to fill in that void, because that's a $350,000 a year void.
I guess I have a
I mean, if it takes 3.5, I guess we'd get interest. I mean, it may not be 350,000, but it's a sizable amount of money that has to go into an escrow fund somewhere so that we can, that's assuming we want to pay cash for the turf, unless you want to bond it out every 10 years.
If you get into a payment cycle that's sustainable, you could then continue that payment cycle to replace the turf.
Right.
But it would be a function of, kind of right-sizing the scope and the finances to match up. But, and I understand the conversation for quite some time now has been this $4 million ask, and there's that vision out there. You have the opportunity to say, this is what we set for a rate, this is our anticipated revenue, and we need to revise the project scope to match up with that. That could be, some of the highest priorities are bathrooms and facility improvements beyond turf, and it could mean that you size the turf work to sync up with not only the current revenue, but the life cycle and the ongoing ability to make those payments. That may not mean you can turf all the fields, but you could turf some.
Just one quick question for you regarding, we're having a strategic planning session tomorrow, 1 of 2. Is this the kind of conversation that you had anticipated that we would be able to have to some degree in terms of, that actually the material you presented is incredibly thorough and incredibly depressing. I mean, I'm sorry, Debbie, but whoo. At any rate, but to me, this is precisely the sort of conversation that I would hope would come out of that, if we're like, well, we're not comfortable committing the whole 1.3% of the increased transient guest tax, that, we could set another amount, but not having the scope of the project in front of us, it's hard to know, without just being completely arbitrary, where to set a potential increase that we could all get behind and support. But I don't know if that's the sort of conversation that you were anticipating that we would be having tomorrow.
I think we can have that conversation at a level of, here's what our fund balances are,
Right.
here's what our revenue expenditures look like historically and going forward. In these unique times, we need to have conversations about the American Rescue Plan and some of the stimulus money and our fund balances. So you'll have an opportunity to get a better sense of our financial picture. I don't think through tomorrow's strategic planning process, we're to the point of allocating, scope items and costs associated with any particular project, let alone this one.
No, I get that.
But we could have the conversation of, for projects of this type, these are the sources of revenue that we have. This is our pot. It's sales tax, economic development. Yeah,
Right.
I'm just making stuff up, but gas tax, whatever the pot is, that could be directed towards
Yeah.
economic. I mean, you could put this economic development. You could do it Parks and Recs. I mean, it could come in lots of different
Right.
pots, but.
We could. I don't want to lead you to believe that there's a pot of money we're holding back that could be applied for this.
Well, no, that's my fear,
Yeah.
that we don't have a pot of money
Right.
that we're
Well,
holding back.
In fact, that the conversation, previous conversations kind of got us to the point of targeting the transient guest tax. With the fund balance and American Rescue Plan, those, or If you want to talk about the park master plan annual allocation, those are probably the most likely alternate sources of revenue.
Poor park master plan has probably been shot at and decimated more than any of our major projects. I mean, things that plan to do, and then things get
Right.
put on the back burner because the next greatest project comes along. And again, all good projects. But at some point, we need to set a plan and stick with it.
When would you anticipate having more information regarding any funds from the American Rescue Plan being available for this project? Because that was what we had discussed in terms of lost
Revenue.
transient guest tax revenue.
I'll look to Deputy City Manager Wood.
Yeah, I think we certainly can use American Rescue funds to replace transient guest tax that was decreased in the last year. The question about how we use it moving forward, that's something that I think we're going to have to wait on the Department of Treasury to provide some guidance on. It's really not clear about how do you account for lost revenue in the future? You know, that's not just the last couple of years. The time frames and how you account for that's really, it's not clear. So at some point, Treasury will provide guidance on how they view those things. But at this point, we just don't have that.
Do we know when the guidance on that will be out by chance?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, we're not even receiving funds. I expect we'll probably receive some funds in the next 90 to 120 days. I mean, those funds haven't even really started flowing yet.
Because we're at the size those will flow through the state, is that correct?
Right. For us, they will. So the county will get a direct allocation, but for us, they'll go to the state, and then the state has the opportunity to delay a few times, depending on their ability to get it transferred down. So, it could be some time before we actually see those funds, and I'm anticipating that they'll.
Wouldn't you expect guidance to be there when you get the
Jacob may
funds?
be aware of something I'm not, but I haven't seen, all I've seen is guidance is forthcoming. I haven't seen
Yeah.
any articulated goal, let alone a deadline.
It's
No,
hard for me to believe
no,
it
yeah.
hands money without guidelines. I'd like,
But the
don't
bill,
think that
the
it
bill
could happen, but you would think that there'd be guidelines at the same time or prior to receiving the funds.
Yeah, so the timeline I'm talking out of is specifically outlined in the bill. It says that the funds will come down, and they call them tranches. So there'll be a first tranche that comes to the state within a certain time period, and then after that, they'll allocate it down to us.
Because we get ours in 2 tranches, correct? And we
That's
do not
correct.
know exactly what that dollar amount will be. Is
We
that
don't.
correct also?
We do not.
But they'll have to establish some kind of guidance, won't they, before they release the first tranche, right? I mean, because,
some of the cover-
you can,
You would think.
you would think, I mean, you can give us money, but I would think it would be very difficult to retroactively
Well,
say, oh, by the way, what you used it for.
Right, so that's the concern, is
Yeah.
that we allocate this money in a way that's inappropriate, but we don't know it's inappropriate until
Right.
it's already gone. And so that's why we have to be really careful about how we look at it in our interpretation of the bill. And if you put the cart before the horse, I think somebody said earlier, that could cause issues later on down the road. But it's so new, and there's so much money flowing, I think it's going to be a little bit of time before we get too much clarity on what that looks like.
And the discussions I've been involved with so far, which have been a while ago now, cautioned against getting too far ahead, that Department of Treasury will review the expenditures and opine on them, and so you could run the risk of them, after you've spent it, concluding that they don't agree with it. But have yet to see a firm commitment on when the guidelines will be produced.
I mean, the good thing is that we do have an extended period of time to expend the money. I mean, it doesn't have to be spent until, I think it's December 21st of 2024. So there's plenty of time to figure out how we'll allocate it. But
And I
it's
read that.
maybe not timely for this project.
2024 to spend it. Does that mean you can look at losses from 2019 to 2024, or is it?
That's a great question. That's something that we certainly would like to know.
We ask good
don't know.
questions. This commission asks really good questions.
And just to be clear, it's not only loss-oriented. There are eligible expenditures
Right.
Right.
beyond just loss recovery.
Well, and I know we received a letter about, some of the money that's coming out for the infrastructure, and is some of that available for the river project or other things too? So
Right.
there's going to be a lot of research to be done yet. but,
So that would be basically a one-time payment of sorts that we would use to buy down the amount of investments that we'd have to borrow less.
Correct.
Yeah, my whole thought was if some of those funds are available, you're reducing the amount of debt that you're having to go out and get. And of course, I was calculating a 4%. If we could get rates like we have now, of course, that project's out of ways. But you would, hopefully be able to drop that transient guest tax, to 7 3/4 or something, or 7 1/2. I don't know. Again, will be decided here in the next few months, I'm guessing.
So the timeline that you've given us here was built to accommodate, like whatever, this going into effect October 1st to correspond, because this transient guest tax adjustments can be made quarterly, correct? So we're trying to do that. So, and we have to supply was it the Department of Treasury, like a 30-day notification prior to that going? So I'm just, okay, so September 1st, and I'm just kind of going back through the dates that we have here, and it looks to me like we have about 30 days of wiggle room to meet the October 1st deadline. Failing that, would the next one then be January 1st? That would be
That's correct.
beginning of the next quarter? Okay.
Yeah, and I haven't run the date calculations. I think you're pretty close on the 30 days time frame. So we could potentially push this a few more weeks, and maybe up to a month. I'd have to really look at the dates.
Right.
But we could potentially do that and not make a decision tonight. And still hit October 1st.
Really like to, maybe I'm expecting too much from tomorrow, from our strategic planning session, but to have that discussion, we're in the unique situation that hesitancy on any one of the four of us here defeats this, so it's got to be a unanimous decision. And I would rather have a discussion about how we're going to go about getting money, in other words, the gas for this car, and then commit to the financing.
I guess I'm going to look at city staff. Is that actually part of our discussion tomorrow?
This particular project and the cost of it is not.
I mean,
Fund
I
balance
guess
is-
what I'm getting at is Commissioner Davis is looking for answers tomorrow, and I
Right.
guess
Well, not so much this project, because it really doesn't matter which project it is. It's, if you bring me a economic development project, where are pots of money? If you bring me a parks project, where are the funds we have available? If you bring me a housing project, rather than just make it up as we go, set priorities in our budget, and, then there's funding left over, or, we can only afford but so many projects of a certain type because we only have so much money coming in.
And
So it really wouldn't matter which project it is, yeah.
So I think tomorrow the intention is to provide you a lot of background in terms of fund balances and availability of funds, kind of as Commissioner Davis has described. It wouldn't be necessarily at this particular project level. And then coming out of that, whatever you identify as priorities, and we were going to attempt to do an initial staffing through of those for your May 5th strategic planning session and be able to report back to you kind of the policy implications and kind of that background information. Again, wouldn't have that high level of detail, but would have a higher level than kind of the generalities that we're talking in today about whatever it is that you identify as your priorities you want us to focus on.
Yeah, and it may not be that we may get a better super project 3 weeks from now, but if it falls into one of our priorities, then we should be able to shift our budget to meet those priorities.
our second strategic planning is like May 5th, right?
Correct.
Yes, when?
May 5th. And obviously today's the 12th. So I feel like that fits in with our 30 days, and whether or not we discuss this specific project, something that I just keep returning to is I feel like we need to know more exactly what we need to see from this. And in terms of looking at all the other projects that we have out there, I think we, need to affirm where we're going to take this money, where we're going to secure it, and if we are going to be able to develop some sort of escrow account to try to put money back so that we aren't in the same position in another 10 or 15 years. I'll be honest. I'm kind of struggling with this. I support the project. I want to see the project happen. I think that the transient guest tax is a logical portion of that funding, but with the unknowns, I'm struggling a little bit, and so I'm looking to both of y'all to. I'm just, like I said, I'm struggling a little bit with this.
Well, there's a lot of bright folks out in the audience. Maybe one of them has a great idea.
All right. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this issue and provide a solution to our budgetary shortfalls? Please step right forward if that's the case.
Yeah, I guess I'm somewhat confused is that we were last year in support of this, knowing that these were issues that we were going to be dealing with at some time, and now all of a sudden we seem to
Well,
be in panic mode.
well, that's it, the word sometime, because we asked repeatedly, where's the money from the escrow fund? Well, we'll have fees. Can't imagine you're going to charge that much out there to rack up extra $350,000, even $300,000 a year that we can just put aside for field escrow. But it's an issue that's been swept under the rug that's just never been settled. I guess one other option is that after 10 years, that money would be generated to pay off the project in 10 years? Was it 10 or 15?
Well, the numbers are moving around as you change the percentage, but the numbers that were provided to you previously
15 or 20.
assumed the 8%, and I think it gave you a 10-year and a 15-year scenario.
15 and 20.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
15,
I
20.
calculated mine on a 10 and a 15.
Yeah, if the infrastructure is paid off, the basic stuff we would do now is paid off in 10 years, and we're used to paying that money, that money can then, on year 11, be used to pay the debt for the
And it
field
should be
replacement.
significantly less, because
Right.
you're not having to pay for installing
Yeah.
the turf will be considerably more because of the underlayment and all that. Also, you're not going to be the bathrooms and the concession stands, and I don't have my numbers in front of me, but you're probably $1 million plus on those. So you're going to be financing considerably less in 10 years than you would be at the initial
On year
time.
one.
Unless there's an underground river coming down the runway, which,
Well,
Sucks that right, but-
most of this is at Bill Burke and maybe one premium field at East Crawford, I believe. The scope of this, and again, when we look at replacement costs, and this is one thing we have to talk about, the 2 softball fields have been done at South High. In my mind, those no longer become our responsibility. So I think we just took 2 fields off our future maintenance requirements. There's also, at some point, dollars to be saved from watering and mowing fields, and if nothing else, chalking and dragging the fields every day too. So there's some savings there. Now, granted, we'll probably find somewhere else for those people to do something in the Parks Department, but
Well, I don't know where this,
Well, I mean,
leaves
I'd
us.
like to see a plan, where, we've pay this in 10 years. I mean, that's, Commissioner Franz was saying, why pay for something longer than its useful life? And again, if we're used to that tax for 10 years, assuming nobody needs a new football field or something, that tax doesn't go up, it stays there, and it then goes for the replacements.
If it's helpful, you can approach this a couple of ways. I mean, the traditional way is design, bid, build, where you put your design together, you figure out what the cost is, and you proceed. You have kind of tackled this the other way around, saying, let's get the revenue source in place, and then I was anticipating you're going to task staff with bring us a scope that matches up with the available revenue. And in that case, it's more like what you're talking about now, where we would say, okay, we need to scope the high priority items. We need to figure out what we can afford over the life of improvements and make provision for, ongoing replacement of those. All the variables that you're talking about could be taken into account, but what would end up happening is the scope of the project would have to be adjusted based on the available revenue, rather than you've just scoped the absolute end goal and now let's find a way to pay for it. You've said, here's your budget, let's make it work.
Right, I don't see us being in any situation other than that latter scenario. Here's your budget, get as much out of it as you can.
I think that was
Yeah.
the premise that started us down the path of let's get this
this in
tax
place.
in
And it's hard to tell, but this project was done for the fact that, if we're going to, we've talked about how the hoteliers and those have been hurt. If this project doesn't go forward, I firmly believe we'll see a significant reduction in tournaments that come to our community, and you will see a drop in income for the hoteliers.
I
Because I
understand that,
believe.
But at the end of the day, we own those fields and we have to take care of them, replace them. And we know that's an expense coming, so I mean, we might as well have some idea now where that money's coming from. And it could be the same money that we use to build. And I'd say city staff has always done a good job of massaging the numbers, expanding, shrinking a project, and generally what we've ended up with has always been a really good project. I mean, we made compromises on the field house and on the police training facility, and I don't think anybody visiting either of those facilities right now would say, wow, they scrimped here, they scrimped there. I mean, they're good-looking projects.
okay, so,
Yeah,
Don't
I'd
count
like,
the cost.
I mean, we
Yeah,
need to
we
move
need to
forward.
do
I don't know
Yeah.
to make a motion, or
right,
are
and
we,
that,
I guess, are we going to, are we wanting to put this off till after May 5th? I mean, I'm not, I'm kind of confused right now as to where we're at.
I agree, and, I mean, I'm obviously sensing some hesitancy on the part of Commissioner France and to some extent myself, and obviously, in order to get this passed, we need to have a unanimous vote on this charter ordinance. I think one of the things that's standing out to me is if we knew that we were going to need 8% and that was going to cover what we needed to do, I think I would be in a better place to go ahead and say, okay, let's either do this or let's not do this. But I think that, I think that, if we were to pass this tonight, we should just assume that we're going to be doing it for 8%. I mean, I wouldn't see us ever backing off that number if we've already made the commitment to that.
And
I'm thinking maybe we need to have a chance to review what Baseball Enterprises has presented to us and take a look at, the scope of work and what we're going to be getting for our investment, and whether or not there's going to be any federal funding that we're going to be able to use for this, or if it's all going to be on the back of the transient guest tax, and if we're okay with that. But I'm not seeing that we're going to, come to a positive conclusion tonight, is what I'm saying, is if we're going to get this, the charter ordinance amended.
Mayor Hodges, we did have one person on the online that raised their hand.
Okay? I'd like to go ahead.
Mr. Blanchard, I'll give you access here.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you guys very much, and thank you for your deliberation on this item. First of all, I'd like to extend my thoughts and prayers to Commissioner Franz and his friends and families. Sorry, he's not there with you. Couple of things that caught my ear. One, last week when Ms. Balthazar mentioned Mr. Weilert's operations and the downfall in the amount of revenue that he's been able to generate. The second thing related to that was the comment made today by Eric Brown about how the competitive environment particularly for convention facilities could be significantly impacted with any raising of the transient guest tax. And just for a little bit of history, I'll take you back, and Mike Scragg and some of you may be aware that when Mr. Weilert began to look at different ways that he could finance a meet and sleep facility in town with a great deal of prodding from Visit Salina, he initially had asked for a portion of the transient guest tax, and I was part of the board that said we really don't want to go there, and we ended up going with the CID. And as you all know, the CID is directly impacted by whatever sales tax he's able to generate on those rooms. So I think this would be sort of a double whammy on those 3 hotels that comprise that CID. The other thing is that I don't know if you've done any research on who actually pays for a rise in the transient guest tax, but all of the research out there seems to indicate that 1/3 is paid by the traveler, 1/3 is paid by the hotelier, and 1/3 is paid by the employees in the form of fewer raises, fewer benefits, and things such as that. So at a time when I think it's pretty obvious that a lot of the people that work at those their service employees tend to be female and tend to be persons of color. And so, unfortunately, a lot of them fall on the lower end of the economic ladder. The last thing I want to mention is that I haven't heard anyone that opposes the project, nor do I. However, the financing is critical. Couple of suggestions, and I don't know if they're possible, but it seems that baseball and softball are ingrained in the Celina cultural fabric. And so is it possible to use any CARM funds that are already collected in the transient guest tax for that? Also, we hear every time about what an economic development engine these are. And I don't hear anyone debating those, but why don't we dedicate economic development funds for economic development projects? And then the last thing, I'm simply urging you to wait and maybe have further discussions about this when you have a more concrete view of where you actually want to be on this. And I just have one question, if you can answer it for me, the petition in regards to the petition process. Does the petition process clock start at the initial first reading, or does it start at second reading? Because I think there would be, if it is 8%, I think you would get a successful petition. If it's if the increase is half of that, it might be more palatable to a lot of people and might avoid a public vote. But either way, the October 1st date would be moot if there is a public petition, because it would then need to be on the referendum and the timeline would be extended out for that. So I appreciate all your efforts and your deliberations. A lot of the questions are great ones, and
Funding is always tough, but I think if you keep discussing it and make your decisions based on data and with input from the people that this is going to affect directly, I think that you'll get a lot more public support on this. So thank you for your time and your efforts.
Thank you. In regard to the CARM fund, that's dedicated for marketing for TPEC? Or is that, no, that's the,
There's a portion, I'm trying to find it here in the staff report, but it's all by
that's for
way of,
the cooperative marketing with the different agencies, right?
correct.
That's, okay, I'm sorry. Okay,
There is
Yeah.
a ½ dedicated
Yeah.
to cultural arts regional marketing.
right. And in terms of our economic development fund, aren't we, the last I remember, aren't we depleting that more quickly than we are replenishing it?
Well, yes, we maintain a balance that's available as an economic development incentive for prospects, and so
Yeah.
the most recent commitments that we've made have basically expended that fund. Over time, we should be able to regain a balance, but it's all spoken for at the moment.
You, off the top of your head, have a rough idea of at what rate it replenishes per year?
I don't know about the top of my head.
Okay.
I believe the fund that you're talking about is the fund that we're funding from sales tax, 3.9% from the sales tax. We do actually spend in support for economic development industries such as SDI and SCEDO. We spend a little bit more than what we make currently on that 3.9%. It's not much, but we do deplete that a little bit. We do have a fund balance in there now, but I think it's basically the same as anybody else. We decreased our expenses in 2020 due to COVID, and we recognize that revenue. That's what I'm remembering, but that's not always right either.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, to move this along, because we've kind of discussed this to death,
Just one, so
Yeah.
if this money was in perpetuity assigned to the baseball project, then we're basically putting baseball complexes on the same footing as our TPEC subsidy, which comes out of that money as well, correct?
Correct.
yeah.
If it were assigned in perpetuity, yes.
Right, well, it'd be assigned at least for 20 years, because 10 to pay for the stadium and 10 to replace the field,
Yeah.
and which would have to be replaced in another 10 years. So it would sound like a continuously needed fund.
Here's what I propose, which is probably, may not even be legal. But it sounds like there are questions about the project and its impact on the transient guest tax and where we're going to need to increase that transient guest tax to, and that there's still some confusion about any federal funds that may be available for us. So I really, I hate to do this for what amounts to, in essence, two agenda items in a row, but I really feel like that we need to defer this conversation until after we've had our May 5th strategic planning. And if those of us, Commissioner Davis obviously has a lot of questions, I have a few questions. If we're able to talk through those with staff, perhaps with each other at the second session, I think that I would like for us to all go into this on the same page and feel really good about this decision, because this is a really, really good project. But it's the financing mechanism when it comes down to it, and I understand the impetus to push it up to demonstrate our commitment, which is great, but it also creates a kind of a ripple effect that now we've got some other questions that we need to have answered now that we're actually faced with the decision. So I don't know if that's acceptable to the other commissioners or not.
Well, since we need 4 votes, I don't know if we have any choice.
Yeah,
Because I don't see 4 votes up here,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, and again, I don't know where our conversation would go tomorrow. I think a lot of my questions will get answered tomorrow. Of course, the more you discuss something, the more questions you end up with. I was going to ask something about what she's, bear with me just for a split second there, and it's probably out of my head. It may come back.
So what do we need to do to move it to after the May?
What's the latest date? we
The
can
next
postpone
Monday
to
after that
still?
strategic planning would be May 10th. Now, having said that,
With
packet day would
moving
be
it to May
24
10th,
hours
does
after
that
the
then move
strategic
the
planning
start?
conversation.
What's
So,
that?
The packet would have to go out 24 hours after the strategic planning, so it's probably not realistic to put it on the 10th, more realistic to put it on the 17th.
17th?
So if we did May 17th, the timeline, I'm looking at Mr. Wood, since he's kind of put this timeline together, does that move us to January of 2022 for a start date?
Hang on, so,
It would have to, wouldn't it?
hang on, May 17th, May 24th,
Well,
public,
if you push everything back a month, the July 2nd becomes August the 2nd. That gives you the no legal holidays in August. That gives you 4 Mondays in August to do the first and second reading to set the rate.
So if this pushes it back 5 weeks.
But now, would the information coming out of that second strategic planning session materially alter information that would be on a blue sheet?
We could certainly prepare it for the 10th, and you could, act or choose not to act based on what we know at that point, I guess. And you don't necessarily have to set a date at this point. If you need staff to work that timeline with the goal of October 1, we can flesh that out for you outside of this meeting.
I think, at least speaking for myself, the October 1 deadline would be the goal for myself.
Oh, I know what my question was.
Yeah, go
And that triggered it. Let's just say for whatever reason, travel was down. And the transient guest tax does not perform the way we expect. We then need a Plan B in our back mind as to where funds will come from to make up the shortfall in debt payment.
Assuming that we have debt financed based on the anticipated transient guest tax revenue, then yes. If we see that downturn at a different time and we can adjust and adapt to it, we may not need to. But if we've issued debt based on the transient guest tax revenue and that declines, then yes, we'd still have the debt obligation we'd have to pay.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to have staff get the information in terms of what is the,
Yeah, I think the 17th will work, but I want to verify that math
okay,
for you.
okay. So we'll have staff verify the timeline that will work in order to accommodate the October 1st new transient guest tax rate. And for my part, I'll get my questions refined, and hopefully some of these things that will become more readily apparent when we have our strategic planning sessions.
And that 24th is not the legal day from Memorial Day, it's the 31st?
Yeah, it's the 31st.
Okay.
All right, so do we need to take any action on this?
I don't believe you have to. If you choose not to take any action, it
Okay,
just fails, and
Okay.
staff will work through the calendar and we'll bring it back to you.
okay, thank you. All right, then that will take us to item 8.1.
Item 8.1, consider dedication of electrical transmission line easement across a portion of the Fire Station Number 3 site at 2633 Belmont Boulevard.
All right, Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Evergy has been quite active in the community in terms of upgrading lines, rerouting lines, expanding substations. There's been a lot of activity in easement acquisitions, and city staff was recently contacted by Evergy about their desire to obtain additional easement area across the southwest corner of the Fire Station Number 3 site. There's an existing transmission line there. That transmission line actually predates construction of the fire station, as does an existing easement, but because of upgrades they're making to that line, they are requesting to expand their easement. So the shape would stay triangular. It would be confined to the southwest corner, but they're essentially doubling the size of the easement. We've looked at it. It's in the corner. It's in a front yard setback area. It doesn't really impact the functionality or ability to expand the fire station. The city attorney reviewed their initial easement instrument and requested some modifications to be made. Those have been made, and what's in your packet reflects those modifications. Evergy has offered a payment of $2,500 for the additional easement. And so your alternatives this evening would be to, first of all, you could by motion accept that offered compensation and authorize the mayor to execute the power line easement. You could postpone consideration of this item to a future meeting date to allow staff or Evergy to provide additional information, or you could decline to authorize the dedication at this time and provide additional direction to staff and Evergy.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Are there any questions from the commission?
This, if we were to not accept this, what are Evergy's legal recourses to get this easement?
Well, in staff's experience, having been contacted by some private owners in the community and included on correspondence, Evergy does have condemnation powers, which they have used when property owners have been reluctant to grant the easements. And so we did have a situation out along South 9th Street where a property owner didn't want to, they couldn't agree on a price, and the owner didn't want to grant the easement at all, and that easement was condemned.
When it's condemned, do you still have to pay?
I'll defer that to Mr. Bankston, but in that case, there was a financial settlement as part of the compensation, but I'm not clear on how Evergy's dedication or their condemnation authority compares to ours.
And the only reason I ask is they're going to get this one way or the other. So that's what I think.
Yeah.
Am I not correct?
That is correct.
Okay. That's,
Yeah,
thank you.
gotcha. Any other questions for staff?
So you might as well take the 2,500 and skip the legal fees.
I was just going to.
Unless we can twist their arm and get 5 out of them and put it toward baseball fields. I'm
I-
sorry, I'm getting punchy.
If I may, Mayor, that just to make sure everybody's clear, that if there were conflicting public interests that the city was representing, they don't necessarily trump the city's, if the city had a conflicting right-of-way or
Right.
easement. In this case, the city is the owner of the property abutting the right-of-way. So in that situation where we are much alike a private property owner, without conflicting interests based on staff's analysis, they would have the opportunity to acquire it by eminent domain.
And so I know Mr. Wood was contacted by some property owners on Highland south of here who'd been contacted by Evergy and wondering what their rights and abilities were, and the city is somewhat limited. I mean, if they want the easement, eventually they're going to get it somehow. And so in this case, after reviewing it, we didn't see any reason why granting their request here would cause any harm to the fire station.
Are there any questions or comments from the public? No?
Okay, with that.
All right.
Mayor Hodges, I move we accept the offered compensation of $2,500 and authorize the mayor to execute a power line easement granting additional easement across the southwest corner of Fire Station Number 3 property.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to grant the electrical transmission line easement and accept the offered compensation of $2,500. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye, that motion passes 4-0.
So we'll make sure Ms. Pack collects the $2,500 before we turn the easement loose to Evergy.
That might have been the easiest thing you've ever done, Mr. Mayor.
Is there any other business for this evening?
Not business, I'd just like to compliment whoever's responsible for the great audio on the call-in calls today. This is,
Yeah.
I don't know who gets the credit, but
It's a system.
it was
update
very,
that
very nice.
City, county, and Salina Media Connection staff have been working on for a while,
Great, agree.
and not necessarily in that order.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, we'll see you next week. Well, actually, we'll see you tomorrow for our strategic planning.